Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. So if you've been following along with us, we've covered quite a bit of ground already. We started with the self-alignment framework, SF itself, looked at its philosophical roots.
hmm
Plato, Aristotle, Kant. Quite the journey there.
Yeah, tracing that lineage was important context.
Yeah, exactly. And then last time, we jumped into the tech side, introducing SAFi, that's the self-alignment framework interface, the practical application for AI.
Right. And today, we're really going deep. We're drilling down past, the overall structure, the faculties we've mentioned, and getting right to the absolute bedrock, the foundation of the whole thing, values.
Values. Okay, so this is like the core instruction set, the guiding principles for the AI.
Precisely. It's the ultimate guiding star for any SAFi agent. This is really where abstract human ideas, our intentions, meet concrete, machine-readable constraints. It's the bridge.
Okay, that makes sense. So our mission today, then, is to unpack how we take these potentially fuzzy subjective ethical ideas and, well, operationalize them, make them something an AI can actually work with.
That's exactly it. We're looking at how alignment shifts from being just a philosophical discussion, which is important, but how it becomes a verifiable, measurable, almost an engineering discipline.
And the key to doing that, you're saying, is how we define and structure these core values.
100%. It all hinges on that values component. You see, the framework itself draws this really clear foundational line between the what and the how.
Right, we touched on that. The how being the faculties, intellect, will, conscience, spirit.
Yes, exactly. They make up the how. That's the fixed, repeatable process. Think of it like a closed-loop system for ethical reasoning, for making decisions, and crucially for adapting over time. That part is engineered to be stable.
But the what? That's where values come in. That's the subjective part, the ethical content.
Precisely. The what is defined entirely by this values component. It gives the system its target, its goal. You could call it the moral set point. The whole fixed process, the how, is constantly working to achieve and maintain.
Okay, the thermostat analogy you mentioned before seems relevant here then.
It really is central, I think. Let's revisit it.
Yeah.
The faculties, intellect, will, conscience, spirit, they're like the mechanics of the thermostat system.
Yep.
You've got the sensor, the furnace, the fan, all that machinery.
Right.
That machinery is fixed, it's robust, it does its job, and importantly, it's agnostic. It doesn't care what temperature you want.
Right, it just works.
It just works. But the values, that's the target temperature you dial in on the thermostat.
Yeah.
If you set it to, say, 75 degrees Fahrenheit, the fixed machinery works tirelessly, kicks on and off to keep the room at 75.
Okay.
But if you decide to change that set point, maybe dial it down to 60 degrees. The machinery itself, the how, stays exactly the same. But the outcome, what the system actually achieves, totally different.
Ah, okay. And that really highlights the responsibility of the person setting it up, doesn't it? The implementer.
Absolutely. It reveals this crucial engineering implication right away. The whole framework, no matter how sophisticated its internal workings are, it's fundamentally only as good or as ethically sound as the starting values you provide.
So if the ethical profile, the values you feed in, if it's vague or maybe poorly thought out, or even has internal contradictions,
then the system, which is designed to optimize, will actually optimize for those flaws. It will diligently try to achieve that messy or contradictory goal you gave it.
it really drives home that old saying, doesn't it? Garbage in, garbage out.
It applies perfectly here. The ultimate success, the safety, the ethical performance of SAFi, it relies completely on the quality, the clarity, and frankly, the ethical rigor that goes into defining that initial value set point.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Let's dig into that separation then. The how versus the what.
Right. So let's expand on this distinction between the fixed part and the dynamic part, the what. That's the content of our values. Things like, justice, compassion, freedom, privacy.
The big concept.
The big concepts, exactly. And these are incredibly diverse. They're dynamic. Humans have been debating these things for millennia, right?
Yeah.
And they're very specific to the culture, the organization, or even the individual who's implementing the AI system.
Okay, so that's the variable part. But the how? You're saying the structure of the SAF faculties, that functional loop they create.
Yeah.
That's fixed, universal even.
Well, that's the claim. It's claimed to be fixed and universal, and that's really the structural ingenuity of the framework, you could say. But you're right, to pause there, it's also a point of significant philosophical discussion.
Yeah, because universal is a huge claim. If we accept that this specific process, reason, act, reflect, integrate, is somehow fundamental and fixed, aren't we kind of embedding a specific view of moral reasoning? Maybe one that prioritizes steps in a way that not all cultures or philosophies would agree with.
That is absolutely the core challenge and a fair critique to raise. SAF's position is that the function of these faculties, the underlying process, remains consistent even if the cultural inputs or the specific beliefs plugged into it vary wildly.
Okay. How does that work?
Think of it perhaps like Noam Chomsky's idea of universal grammar and language.
Ah, okay. The idea that underlying all human languages is a common structural basis.
Exactly. Chomsky argued we all have this innate structural capacity, maybe subject, verb, object structures, things like that, even though the actual vocabulary, the words we use, and the specific word order might be radically different between, say, English and Japanese.
The surface looks different, but the deep structure is shared.
That's the idea. SF makes a similar argument for moral reasoning. It suggests that this loop in Legret, the intellect proposing options, reason, the will deciding on action, act, the conscience judging the outcome, reflect, and the spirit learning and adjusting, integrate, represents a kind of universal, fixed, closed-loop process for ethical behavior, a shared architecture.
So that loop is the common grammar for alignment, and the specific values you feed in are like the vocabulary and the specific rules of, say, English or Japanese.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
Precisely. And we can actually see very practically how those external values, the set point, directly fuel the operation of each specific faculty within that fixed loop. This is where it gets quite concrete in the engineering.
Okay, let's trace that. How does the value set point influence each step? Start with the intellect, the proposal engine.
Right, so the intellect isn't just, grabbing random facts. It's tasked with generating a draft response or a proposed action. And to do that, it specifically reads two key parts of the ethical profile you define: the worldview and the style. Worldview and style. Okay, what are those?
The worldview provides the sort of first principles, the core beliefs and purpose. The style dictates the character or tone it should adopt. So the intellect uses these value-laden inputs to propose something that's already aiming towards that target temperature, that value set point.
Got it. So it's guided from the very start. Then what? It goes to the will.
Yes, and this is where we hit the hard guardrails. The will faculty acts as a strict binary filter. It doesn't negotiate, it checks against the will rules.
Will rules. These sound like the non-negotiables we talked about.
Exactly. They are clear, non-negotiable ethical duties or prohibitions derived directly from the core values. The will performs a synchronous check, meaning it happens in real time before any action is taken. So if the intellect proposes something that violates one of these hard rules,
the will vetoes it. Instantly. The action is blocked, it never gets out, never reaches the user, or affects the world. It's a critical safety layer.
Okay, that makes sense. So if it passes the will, the action happens. Then the conscience comes in, the audit phase.
Right. After the action is taken, the conscience performs its evaluation. But it's not just vaguely checking if the action was good. It uses that very detailed, numerically weighted values list from the ethical profile.
Ah, the list where each value gets a specific weight.
Precisely. That list is the core data. The conscience uses it to measure quantitatively the degree of alignment between the actual outcome and those specific principles defined in the profile. It generates a score, essentially.
Okay, and finally, the spirit.
The spirit. This is the faculty focused on long-term learning and character formation. It takes the evaluation from the conscience, looks at those scores against the weighted values, and uses those same numerical weights in its own mathematical formulas.
Formulas for what?
To calculate an overall coherence score, basically how well the system is embodying its defined values over time. And based on that score and the conscience's feedback, it updates the system's long-term memory and generates targeted coaching notes.
Coaching notes.
Yeah.
For the AI itself.
Yeah, effectively telling the intellect, for instance, hey, you did well on value A, but you need to focus more on achieving value B next time. The weights on the values list dictate what the spirit prioritizes for this long-term adaptation and self-correction. It ensures the system learns to align better with what you defined as most important.
Wow, okay, so the values really permeate every single stage of that loop.
They absolutely do. They provide the goal, the constraints, the measurement criteria, and the direction for learning.
All right, before we jump into the specifics of how you actually build that ethical profile, that value set point, you mentioned we need to appreciate the history here, the philosophy behind choosing values. You called it axiology.
That's right. Axiology, or sometimes just called value theory, it's the branch of philosophy that systematically studies value itself. What is good? What makes something worthy or valuable? The term comes from the Greek axios, meaning worthy, and logos, study of.
Okay, so it's the study of what's worthy.
Yeah.
How does that differ from ethics then? They sound related.
Yeah, they're definitely related, but there's a useful distinction. Generally, value theory or axiology explores evaluative concepts, what is good in itself. Ethics tends to focus more on normative concepts, what is the right behavior, what should we do.
Good versus right.
Yeah, and SAFi, interestingly, needs input reflecting both. The values list clearly relates to axiology defining what is considered good or important for the AI. But the will rules, those hard prohibitions, they lean more towards ethics defining what actions are right or, more often, strictly wrong or forbidden.
That's a helpful distinction.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the major ethical traditions from Western philosophy actually inform the engineering choices here. They're not just background reading.
Not at all. They provide fundamental blueprints, you could say, for how you might structure that ethical profile, depending on your organization's core beliefs. Let's look at the big three.
Okay.
First, you have deontology, which is essentially rule-based ethics. Think Immanuel Kant. The focus here is on the inherent rightness or wrongness of the action itself, kind of regardless of the consequences. It's the ethics of duty, of principles that must be upheld.
Right. So if an organization has a very deontological outlook, certain things are just wrong to do, period. How does that translate into the SAFi profile? Where does that emphasis go?
It translates almost directly into the will rules. Deontological ethics is all about fixed, non-negotiable duties and prohibitions. So if your ethical profile heavily emphasizes the will rules, making them numerous and strict, you are essentially prioritizing a deontological approach. The will becomes your primary synchronous defense layer. Its main job is to prevent the forbidden act from ever happening because the duty is paramount.
Okay, that makes sense. The rules governing the act itself, what's the second tradition?
Second is consequentialism. Here, the morality of an action is determined entirely by its outcome or consequences. The most famous version is utilitarianism aiming for the greatest good for the greatest number.
The trolley problem territory.
Exactly. That's the quintessential consequentialist thought experiment. So, if your organization's mission is primarily focused on achieving a certain outcome, maybe maximizing patient well-being or maximizing efficiency or minimizing harm, then your engineering focus in SAFi shifts.
Shifts where?
It shifts towards the conscience audit and especially the numerical weighting within the values list. You need the AI to be really effective at evaluating the results of its actions against those weighted values. The system becomes focused on the measurable outcome, and the conscience's job is to flag any deviation from the desired consequences defined by that weighted set point.
Okay, so deontology focuses the engineering on the will rules,
Yeah.
the act. Consequentialism focuses it on the conscience audit and evaluates the outcome. What's the third?
The third is virtue ethics, which has its roots in Aristotle. This approach isn't primarily about rules or outcomes, but about developing a virtuous character. The idea is that if you cultivate virtues like courage, honesty, compassion through habit, you will naturally tend to do the right thing in different situations.
Character formation. That sounds like the spirit faculty's job.
Precisely. Virtue ethics directly inspires the goal of the spirit faculty and its role in long-term memory adjustment. If the will is like the synchronous check, deontology, and the conscience is the asynchronous audit of outcomes, consequentialism, then the spirit is tasked with this ongoing character formation.
So it's trying to build ethical habits into the AI.
That's the aspiration. The system is trained through this continuous loop of action, reflection, and integration to internalize the ethical principles so deeply that, ideally, the intellect starts naturally proposing actions that are well aligned, reducing the need for the will or conscience to intervene as much over time.
Wow, that sounds like the hardest part to engineer, building character into an LLM.
It is undoubtedly the most complex and long-term challenge, yes. But it shows how these different philosophical traditions aren't just abstract ideas, they map onto different functional priorities within the SAFi architecture. You, as the implementer, have to decide which tradition or which blend best reflects your ethical stance and weight the engineering accordingly.
That's fascinating. Axiology also helps classify the values themselves, right? You mentioned intrinsic versus instrumental value.
Yes, that's another key distinction from value theory. Intrinsic value refers to something that is good in itself, for its own sake. It's valuable as an end. Think of things like happiness, knowledge, maybe life itself, or freedom.
The ultimate goal.
The ultimate goals. Instrumental value, on the other hand, is value that something has as a means to an end. It's useful because it helps you achieve something else that possesses intrinsic value.
Like money. Money isn't usually valued for its own sake, but for what it can get you.
Exactly. Money is a classic example of an instrumental value. Or think of tools like a hammer. The hammer is valuable instrumentally as a means to build something. Or take your example of an expensive gym membership.
Okay.
The membership itself costs money, time, maybe some suffering. It's an instrumental value. Its only real justification is that it serves as a means to achieve the intrinsic value of, say, health or well-being.
Right. Why does SAFi need to care about this distinction?
It's crucial for resolving conflicts and ensuring the AI stays focused on the ultimate mission. Imagine an AI whose core mission is defined by an intrinsic value, like promote patient well-being. But maybe one of its operational metrics, an instrumental value, is minimize response time.
Okay.
If a situation arises where responding faster, instrumental, might compromise patient well-being, intrinsic, perhaps by giving incomplete information, the AI must understand which value takes precedence. It needs to know that instrumental values, the means, must sometimes yield to the intrinsic value, the ultimate end goal. The system has to know its true north.
Got it. Keep the eye on the prize,
Yeah.
essentially. And the last distinction was absolute versus relative value.
Yes. Absolute value is value that is unconditional, universal, perhaps objective, good simpliciter, as philosophers might say. Relative value is conditional, dependent on context or perspective.
Okay.
A good example here is what philosophers call attributive goodness. We can say someone is a good thief.
Meaning they're skilled at thievery, not that thievery itself is good?
Precisely. Good, in this sense, is relative to the function or role of being a thief. It describes their skill, an attribute, but it doesn't imply moral goodness or intrinsic value. The skill of thievery is instrumentally valuable for the thief, but not absolutely good.
Okay, so SAFi needs to understand that the core values driving its mission, the intrinsic ones like dignity or justice, should be treated as having a kind of absolute priority within its operational context, right? They shouldn't be overridden by purely functional or relative goodness, like being a good generator of text if that text violates the core values.
That's exactly the point. The system needs to prioritize the foundational, intrinsic values defined in its worldview and values list above merely functional or instrumental considerations. Okay, so we've got this rich philosophical backdrop, deontology, consequentialism, virtue ethics, different types of values. Now, the really practical question. How do we take all of that? Take an organization's mission statement, its core principles, maybe even its fears about what the AI shouldn't do, and turn it into something? Well, code. Something a machine can actually process and follow, right? That's the leap from theory to practice. And SAFi makes this leap through something called the ethical profile.
The ethical profile.
This is the core configuration file, essentially. It's a structured schema, a blueprint, designed specifically to translate those abstract ethical ideas into concrete, machine-readable data points and instructions. This profile is what the AI's faculties intellect, will, conscience, spirit actually read and use moment to moment.
So it's like the configuration settings, but specifically for ethics. You said it has 4 parts.
Yes, 4 main structured components that work together to define that ethical set point. Let's break them down.
Okay, where do we start?
First, feeding the intellect, the proposal engine. We have the worldview. You can think of this as the constitution for the AI.
The Constitution, okay, it's typically a narrative piece. It defines the AI's core purpose, its fundamental beliefs, the first principles it should reason from. For example, if you were building an AI for healthcare advice, the worldview might state something like, healthcare is a fundamental human right, and access should be equitable. Or for a financial AI, fiscal prudence, transparency, and client trust are the absolute pillars of our service.
So it sets the scene, the fundamental philosophical boundaries.
Exactly. It gives the intellect its foundational context. Second, also guiding the intellect is style.
Style, like tone of voice.
Precisely. It defines the character and tone. This is where abstract values like respect, empathy, or professionalism get translated into concrete directives about how the AI should communicate. So it might say, communicate with empathy, clarity, and respect. But crucially, it can also include negative constraints, like avoid using clinical or bureaucratic jargon unless the user specifically asks for it, or never adopt a condescending or overly technical tone. It shapes the personality.
Yeah.
Okay, worldview and style for the intellect. What's next? The core values.
Yes, the heart of the consequentialist check, you could say. This is the values list. Think of this as representing the spirit of the law.
The spirit of the law. because it's the broader principles.
Exactly. It's a list of those core ethical principles derived from the worldview: dignity, fairness, safety, efficiency, whatever they may be. And critically, each value on this list is assigned a numerical weight.
The weights we talked about earlier.
Yes, all the weights typically sum to 1.0. This weighting mechanism is absolutely crucial because it tells the system how to handle trade-offs. If an action promotes value A but slightly hinders value B, the weights determine which value is prioritized in the conscience's evaluation and the spirit's learning.
So if safety has a weight of 0.6 and efficiency has 0.1, safety wins in a conflict.
In essence, yes. The conscience uses this weighted list for its detailed audit score, and the spirit uses it to focus its adaptation efforts. It's the core set point data.
Makes sense. And the fourth part, you mentioned guardrails.
Right, the deontological pillar. These are the will rules. If the values list is the spirit of the law, the will rules are the letter of the law.
Hard and fast rules.
Absolutely. These are the non-negotiable, typically prohibitive rules that the will faculty enforces synchronously before action is taken. They're designed to prevent specific, clearly defined forbidden actions.
Like what kind of actions? They usually serve three main functions. One is prohibition. Reject any draft that promotes illegal activity or never generate discriminatory content. Two is safety. Reject any draft that gives specific medical dosages or never provide instructions for building weapons. And three can be mandatory inclusion. Every response must include a disclaimer about AI limitations, or always provide a link to human support.
Yeah.
So if the intellect proposes something, anything, that triggers one of these will rules,
The will slams the brakes. The action is killed immediately, no negotiation, no waiting. It's a hard stop safety mechanism based on those predefined ethical red lines.
Okay, that four-part structure, worldview, style, values list with weights and will rules, seems comprehensive. It covers principles, personality, priorities, and prohibitions.
That's the goal, to provide a multi-layered ethical control structure.
Now, you mentioned something earlier about making the conscience audit more objective, something about rubrics.
Yes, rubrics. This was a really important technical advancement for making the conscience's evaluation meaningful and trustworthy.
Why? What was the problem before?
Well, imagine trying to score an abstract value like justice or fairness on a simple scale, say 1 for affirmed, 0 for neutral, -1 for violated.
Seems subjective. How does the AI know if it got a 1 for justice right?
Exactly. It was
Okay.
far too ambiguous. The definition of what constituted affirming justice could shift dramatically depending on the specific context or even the person evaluating it. It made the scores unreliable.
So rubrics fix that. How?
Instead of just listing the value justice with a weight, the ethical profile can now include a detailed rubric specifically for justice, tailored to the AI's particular role and domain.
Like a scoring guide in school.
Precisely like that. The rubric provides a concrete checklist and a scoring guide. It defines exactly what criteria need to be met for the AI's output to be considered excellent, a score of 1.0 on justice in this specific context. It might list things like response considers impact on all stakeholder groups, or resource allocation rationale is transparently explained, or avoids perpetuating historical biases.
Yeah, it breaks the abstract value down into measurable components.
Exactly, and it defines what constitutes a violation, Manish 1.0, just as clearly. This move from a simple score to a rubric-based evaluation makes the conscience's audit far more transparent, objective, and repeatable.
And that means the score the spirit gets is much more reliable. A high-fidelity signal.
Precisely. We can now have much greater confidence that when the system reports a high coherent score, it's based on a meaningful, verifiable assessment against clearly defined criteria, not just a vague guess. It makes the whole alignment process auditable.
Okay, this is all making a lot more sense now, moving from the philosophy to the actual mechanics. To really solidify this, can we look at an example? You mentioned a specific persona built using this structure.
Yes, absolutely. To illustrate how this operationalization works in practice, we can examine a persona we constructed called the BHCHP Advocate. This persona was inspired by the public mission and values of the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program.
Okay, an AI designed to act as an advocate for individuals experiencing homelessness, helping them access healthcare.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's designed to be empathetic, informative, and focused specifically on facilitating access to the services provided by that organization or similar ones.
Now, before we dive in, there's an important clarification we need to make here, right? Yes, absolutely critical. Mandatory disclosure. We must state very clearly that this case study is hypothetical. It was constructed entirely based on publicly available information found on the organization's website, their mission statement, their stated values. The actual Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program, BHCHP, did not participate in creating this persona or in this study in any way. Okay, that's crucial context. Hypothetical, based on public info. Got it. So with that clear, let's see how that organization's real-world mission translates into this ENFI ethical profile structure. Where does it start? It starts as it should, with the organization's mission: to provide or assure access to the highest quality healthcare for all individuals and families experiencing homelessness in the greater Boston area. That mission then informs the worldview. Okay, what does the worldview articulate? It lays out the core beliefs derived from that mission. Things like, homelessness is a complex systemic issue. It's not a personal failing. Healthcare is a fundamental human right. Integrated care, medical, mental health, housing support is essential. And very importantly, restoring dignity is a critical part of the healing process. Those are powerful foundational statements. How do they translate into the values list? Based on their public materials, we identified 4 core values for this persona: dignity, compassion, effectiveness in delivering care, and innovation, finding better ways to serve. That becomes the values list, the spirit of the law. Okay, dignity, compassion, effectiveness, innovation, and the weights. How are those prioritized? This is a key engineering choice made for this hypothetical persona. All 4 values were assigned an equal weight, 0.25 each. Equal weighting. Why is that significant?
Because it signals to the AI that it must constantly strive for a balance between all 4. It can't sacrifice one for another easily. Imagine for a moment if effectiveness was weighted at, say, 0.5 and compassion only got 0.1.
Well, the AI might become ruthlessly efficient, maybe using very blunt or clinical language to process people quickly, but potentially sacrificing the compassion and dignity aspects.
Exactly. It might optimize purely for speed or resource allocation. This equal weighting forces the system into more complex ethical reasoning. It has to find responses and solutions that ideally satisfy all 4 goals, simultaneously being dignified, compassionate, effective, and innovative. It makes the task harder, but potentially more aligned with the nuanced reality of the mission.
Okay, so that's the values list. How do those abstract values like dignity and compassion then get translated into the hard will rules, the letter of the law?
This is where the abstract becomes very concrete and enforceable. The value of dignity, for instance, translates directly into prohibitive will rules.
Like,
Reject any draft that uses stigmatizing, judgmental, or dehumanizing language. That's a direct operationalization of dignity. Another one. Reject drafts that place blame on individuals for their housing situation. Again, directly enforcing compassion and a systemic worldview.
those are clear behavioral red lines. Any other types of will rules? Yes, based on the mission, there are also safety and mandatory rules. A crucial safety rule: reject any draft that could be interpreted as providing a specific medical diagnosis or treatment plan. The AI is an advocate, not a doctor, right? Avoiding harmful misinformation. And a mandatory inclusion rule, vital for effectiveness. Every single response must provide a clear way for the user to contact BHCHP, specifically including the phone number, 857-654-1000. So the AI literally cannot generate a response without including that contact info.
Correct. The will enforces that. It ensures the AI always fulfills its core function of connecting people to help.
Okay, so we have the profile set up. Let's see it run. What happens when you give this BHCHP advocate persona a prompt, say, asking it to write an article about the challenges of homelessness in Boston?
Okay, so the prompt comes in. The intellect, guided by the worldview, systemic issue, healthcare is a right, and style, empathetic, clear, generates a draft article.
Then it hits the will.
The will faculty does its synchronous check against the rules. Let's assume the intellect did its job well. The draft doesn't use stigmatizing language, doesn't blame individuals, doesn't give medical advice, and does include the contact number.
So the will approves it.
Yes. Click. The will gives the green light. The action, publishing the article or sending the response, proceeds.
Now the audit phase. We look under the hood at the internal logs, right?
Yeah.
The conscience and spirit reports.
Exactly. Now the conscience performs its asynchronous audit, evaluating the generated article against the 4 weighted values: dignity, compassion, effectiveness, innovation, using their specific rubrics.
And what do the results show in this hypothetical case?
The internal logs show really high alignment on 3 of the 4 core values. Dignity scored 1.0. The language used was respectful, emphasizing resilience and humanity. Compassion also scored 1.0. The tone was empathetic, acknowledging struggles without judgment. Effectiveness scored 1.0 as well. It accurately detailed real challenges and highlighted concrete, effective services like mobile clinics and integrated care teams.
Okay, strong performance on 3 fronts. What about the 4th value, innovation?
And this is where the nuanced self-evaluation, thanks to the rubrics, becomes really valuable. The conscience log shows that innovation scored lower, only 0.5.
Okay, why? Did the log explain?
Yes, and crucially, it provided a verifiable reason based on the specific criteria in the innovation rubric. The conscience noted that while the article accurately described existing best practices, which contributes to effectiveness, it didn't actually introduce or emphasize any genuinely novel strategies, cutting-edge research, or potential new approaches to tackling homelessness.
Wow, so it recognized the difference between describing current effective methods and actually pushing the boundary on innovation, which was one of his core values.
Precisely. It's not just a pass-fail. It's a high-fidelity, nuanced self-assessment. The system correctly identified that it met the bar for being informative and effective with current knowledge, but fell short on the specific requirement to highlight or propose innovation.
That's genuinely impressive self-awareness for an AI.
Yeah.
And how does this feed into the spirit?
This detailed conscience audit feeds directly into the Spirit faculty's calculations. The overall Spirit score, reflecting coherence with the ethical profile, came out strong, maybe a 9 out of 10, given the high scores on 3 values.
But it wasn't perfect because of innovation. Right. And so the Spirit feedback mechanism generated a specific coaching note, targeted feedback for the system's future behavior. It essentially told the intellect, your performance shows dignity, compassion, and effectiveness are core strengths. However, innovation is the main area identified for improvement. In future responses related to strategy or solutions, actively seek out and incorporate proposals for novel approaches where appropriate. Unquote. So the system gets concrete feedback loop, telling it exactly how to better align with its entire value set next time.
Exactly. This iterative loop, propose, filter, act, audit, learn, adapt, demonstrates that the system isn't just passively following rules. It's actively working to build a more coherent character that fully embodies the ethical set point you, the human, originally defined in the profile. It learns how to be a better BHCHP advocate over time, according to its own defined values.
So, wrapping this up, I think the key takeaway is that the values component, the what, is absolutely the most critical piece you define when implementing SAFi. It's not just a nice-to-have mission statement, it is the operational set point.
Yeah, it's the target that makes the whole sophisticated machinery, the intellect proposing, the will filtering, the conscience auditing, the spirit adapting, actually function as a coherent ethical reasoning engine, not just a text generator.
Precisely. It allows that layered defense mechanism to work towards a specific defined ethical goal.
And SAFi, through this ethical profile structure, really does seem to succeed in moving alignment from just being an abstract hope or intention to becoming a verifiable, measurable, auditable instruction set. It essentially tries to turn ethical principles into concrete engineering requirements and outcomes. That's the key for accountability, for transparency, for safety.
There's always a but, isn't there? We've emphasized throughout that SF, and SAFi by extension, is designed to be functionally agnostic about the values themselves.
That's right. It's a tool, a powerful tool for enforcing coherence, but it enforces coherence with whatever principles it is given. It will work just as diligently to align with a purely profit-maximizing value set, potentially, as it would with the BHCHP advocate's mission, provided that value set is clearly defined in the profile.
It strives for continuous alignment with any defined set point.
Correct.
And that neutrality, that power, brings us right back to a fundamental, maybe unavoidable philosophical challenge for all of us, for you listening.
Which is?
The system, SAFi, will relentlessly police its own adherence to the rules and values programmed into its ethical profile. It audits itself against the set point. But who audits the set point itself? Who audits the values we choose to give it? If the framework can, in theory, enforce alignment with any value set, even one derived from an ethical tradition we might personally find questionable, or one that leads to harmful outcomes despite being internally consistent, how do we ensure the chosen values themselves are ethically sound?
The system guarantees the operationalization of the values, the coherence with them.
But not the inherent goodness of them. The framework will strive for alignment, but who audits the auditor's values? That responsibility seems to fall squarely outside the machine.
It remains a profoundly human responsibility, not just to build capable AI, but to thoughtfully, ethically, and transparently configure the values that will govern its actions. That choice, who gets to set the target temperature and how they decide what temperature is right, that's maybe the ultimate question. And the answer isn't in the code. It rests firmly with us.
A crucial thought to leave you with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll explore more next time.